Hello. Well, so far, I haven't really covered any fiction books in this for random books. So I decided to kick off March, my birthday month, with some fiction books. And the joy of being anyone interested in military history or anything at all, naval history, whatever, is if in doubt, people will always buy you one of three authors. Hence, I have a rather large collection of Richard Cornwell books. I have a rather large collection of Dale Brown books and Bernard Cornwell books, and a rather large collection of this gentleman, Tom Clancy, which are fine. They're all actually good authors, but honestly, that's it. And I do try and explain this to people sometimes. When you buy a military history or military fiction book for someone who spends their entire life researching it and studying it anyway, you're basically saying, here's what you do, go and enjoy a fictional version of your job in your downtime. This is why the fiction books I've bought myself are things like Terry Pratchett. Just a broad hint. I might be the only one in the world like it, but it does seem a little strange to me. Well, you know, if it was just my hobby, I could understand it, but it's my actual job. I spend my day writing this stuff. So, the Sum of All Fears. It's one of my preferred ones. As those in power around the world and around the globe face up to the challenges of a new world order, in Washington, CIA Deputy Director Jack Ryan is putting everything into a plan that could finally bring peace to the Middle East, still suffering from the ravages of war. But too many groups have invested too much blood to allow the plan to succeed. The terrorists have one final desperate card to play. With one terrible act, the world is plunged into nuclear crisis. His dreams of peace shattered, Ryan is confronted with a situation he's never dared imagine. With the world standing on the brink of war, what do you do if the US president is incompetent to deal with the greatest crisis of all? The demonstrations began the next day. They bet everything on this. It was the last desperate throw. The two leaders were Russian Jews who'd only recently been allowed to leave a country that manifestly had little love for them. On arrival in their only true home, they'd been allowed to settle on the West Bank, that part of Palestine that had been taken from Jordan by force of arms in Six-Day War of 1967. Their prefabricated apartments, tiny by American standards but incomprehensibly luxurious by Russian ones, stood on one of the hundreds of rocky slopes that define the region. It was new and strange to them, but it was home, and a home is something people fight to defend. The son of Anatoly, he'd renamed himself Nathan, was already a regular officer in the Israeli army. The same was true of David's daughter. Their arrival in Israel so short a time before had seemed to all of them like salvation itself, and now they were being told to leave their homes again. Their lives had borne enough recent shocks. This was one too many. The whole block of apartments was similarly occupied by Russian immigrants. It was easy for Anatoly and David to form a local collective and get things properly organized. They found themselves an Orthodox rabbi, the only thing they didn't have in their small community, provide religious guidance, and began their march towards the Knesset behind a sea of flags and a holy Torah. Even in so small a country, this took time, but the march was of such a nature as to attract the inevitable media coverage. By the time the sweating and weary marchers arrived at their destination, all the world knew of their trek and its purpose. The Israeli Knesset is not the most sedate of the world's parliamentary bodies. Tom Clancy, the master of understatement. The body of men and women ranges from the ultra-right to the ultra-left, with precious little room for a moderate middle. Voices are often raised, fists are often shaken or pounded on whatever serves to present itself, all beneath the black and white photo of Theodor Herzl, an Austrian whose idea of Zionism in the mid-19th century was the guiding vision for what he hoped to be a safe homeland for his abused and mistreated people. The passion of the parliamentarians is such as to make many an observer wonder how it is possible, in a country where nearly everyone is a member of the Army Reserve and consequently has an automatic weapon in his or her closet, that some Knesset members have failed to be blasted to quivering fragments at their seats in the course of a spirited debate. What Theodor Herzl would have thought of the goings-on is anyone's guess. It was Israel's curse that the debates were too lively, the government too severely polarized, both on political or religious grounds. Almost every religious subject has its own special area of land and consequently its own parliamentary representation. It was a formula calculated to make France's often fragmented assembly look well organized, and it had for a generation denied Israel a stable government with a coherent national policy. The demonstrators, joined by many others, arrived an hour before the debate was begun on the question of the treaties. It was already possible, likely, that the government would fall, and the newly arrived citizens sent representatives to every member of the Knesset they could locate. Members who agreed with them came outside and gave fiery speeches denouncing the treaties. Again, it's work. Clear and present danger. I think this is technically one before Sum of All Fears, but the Sum of All Fears is closer to my normal work. Colombian drug lords, tired of being harassed by US law enforcement agents, have assassinated the American ambassador and the visiting head of the FBI. Their message is clear: leave us alone. Okay, if any Colombian drug lord is ever thinking this and happens to be watching this video, don't do this. Even in fictional world, it ends badly. In real world, that is how you end up with cruise missiles raining down on you, and there is no amount of protection you can buy that's going to protect you from stealth bombers and cruise missiles. You just don't have that financial power. But they have pushed too far. The decision is made to send undercover teams into Colombia. Why? You have stealth bombers. Back in the USA, men armed with the most sophisticated tools their country can devise are prepared to take the fight to the enemy. But does anyone know who the real enemy is? Jack Ryan and CIA field officer John Clark must find the answer. They expect danger from without, yet the greatest danger of all may come from within. Send in recon teams, ascertain where they are, then blow them. That is actually what they start doing in that book, and they use all sorts of things, biodegradable weapons, a lot. Let's go for Tom Clancy, The Bear and the Dragon. Being president isn't getting any easier. You can say that again. Not only is there trouble at home, but the Asian economy is collapsing, and now in an already unstable Russia, someone may have tried to assassinate the chairman of the SVR, formerly the KGB, with a rocket-propelled grenade. Even more disturbing are the possible motives of the assassins. Are they political, criminal, or personal? Or, Ryan wonders, is something far more dangerous going on? While the Russians investigate and some of Ryan's most trusted people head for Moscow, forces in China are moving ahead with a plan of truly audacious scope. Tired of the arrogance of the West and eager to fulfill their destiny, they are taking matters into their own hands. If they succeed, the world will never be the same. If they fail, the consequences may be unthinkable. Now, interesting enough, in this book, it theorizes a Russia which is friendlier with the Americans, and a China which decides to go after a northern resource area rather than a southern resource area. Now, honestly, the northern resource area would be a better avenue for attack for the army, because then actually the army would be at the front of it. If they go after the southern resource area, i.e. the South China Sea and that sort of area, then they will be forever dependent upon the Navy and the Air Force. It was late in Washington, and Adler was up late again, working in his office. Sex State was usually a busy post, and lately it had been busier than usual, and Scott Adler was getting accustomed to 14-hour days. He was reading over post reports at the moment, waiting for the other shoe to drop in Beijing. On his desk was a Stu 6 secure telephone. The secure telephone unit was a sophisticated encryption device grafted onto an AT&T-made digital telephone. This one worked on a satellite communications channel, and though its signal therefore sprinkled down all over the world from its Defense Department communications satellite, all the casual listener would get was raspy static, like the sound of water running out of a bathroom faucet. It had a randomized 512-bit scrambling system that the best computers at Fort Meade could break about a third of the time after several days of directed effort. And that was about as secure as things got. They were trying to make the tap-dance encryption system link into the Stu units to generate a totally random and hence unbreakable signal, but that was proving difficult for technical reasons that nobody explained to the Secretary of State, and that was just as well. He was a diplomat, not a mathematician. Finally, Stu rang in its odd, trilling wobble. It took 11 seconds for the two Stu units on opposite sides of the world to synchronize. Adler? Rutledge here, Scott, said the voice on the other side of the world. Didn't go well, he informed Sex State at once, and they're cancelling the 7-7 order with Boeing, as we thought they would. Adler frowned powerfully onto the phone. Super. No concessions at all on the shootings? Zip. Anything to be optimistic about? Nothing, Scott. Not a damn thing. They're stonewalling, like were the Mongols and the Qin dynasty. Someone needs to remind them that the Great Wall ultimately turned out to be a waste of bricks, Eagle didn't bother saying out loud. Okay, I need to discuss this with the president, but you're probably going to be flying home soon. Maybe Carl Hitch too. I'll tell him. Any chance that we can make some concession just to get things going? Cliff, the likelihood that Congress will roll over on the trade issue is right up there with Tufts making the Final Four, maybe less. Tufts University did have a basketball team, after all. There's nothing we can give them that they would accept. If there's going to be a break, they're the ones who'll have to bend this time. Any chance of that? Zero, was the reply from Beijing. Well then, they'll just have to learn the hard way. The good news, Adler thought, was that the hard lessons were the ones that really did teach you something, maybe even the Chinese. What did the capitalist D.L. Rien say? Zhang asked. Shen told him that Zhu had relayed word for word. And what does he represent? He is a personal assistant to the American Treasury Minister. Therefore, we think he has the ear of both his minister and the American president, Shen explained. He has not taken active part in talks, but after every session he speaks privately with Vice Minister Rutledge. Exactly what their relationship is, we do not know for certain, and clearly he is not an experienced diplomat. He talks like an arrogant capitalist to insult us in so crude a way, but I fear he represents the American position more forthrightly than Rutledge does. I think he gives Rutledge the policy he must follow. Rutledge is an experienced diplomat, and the positions he takes are not his own, obviously. He wants to give us some concessions, I'm sure of that, but Washington is dictating his words, and this gallant fellow is probably the conduit to Washington. They knew a right to adjourn talks. We will give them a chance to reconsider the position. If they think they can dictate to us, then they are mistaken. You cancelled the airplane order? Of course, as we agreed last week. Then that will give them something to think about, Zhang observed smugly. If they do not walk out of talks, they wouldn't dare. Walk away from the Middle Kingdom? Absurd. There is one other thing that the gallant man said. He said, not in so many words, that we need them, their money, that is, more than they need us. And he is not entirely wrong, is he? We do not need their dollars more than we need our sovereignty. Do they really think that they can dictate our domestic laws to us? Yes, Zhang, they do. They apply an astounding degree of importance to this incident. Those two policemen ought to be shot for what they did, but we cannot allow the Americans to dictate that sort of thing to us. The embarrassment of the incident was one thing, and the embarrassment of the state was often a capital offence in People's Republic. But China had to make such a decision on its own, not at the order of an outsider. They call it barbaric, Shen added. Barbaric? They said that to us? You know the Americans have tender sensibilities. We often forget that, and their religious leaders have some influence in their country. Our ambassador in Washington has cabled such warnings to us about this. It would be better if we had some time to let things settle down, and truly, be better to punish those two policemen just to assuage American sensibilities. But I agree, we cannot allow them to dictate the domestic policy to us. And this Grant man says his G is bigger than ours, does he? So Zhu tells me. Our father says he's a stock trader, that he's worked closely with Minister Winston for years. He's a Jew, like lots of them are. Ah, the foreign minister is also a Jew, isn't he? Minister Adler? Yes, he is, Shen confirmed after a moment's thought. So this grant really does tell us their position then? Probably, Foreign Minister Shen said. Zhang leaned forward in his chair. Then you will make them clear on ours. Next time you see this guard, tell him "Je ne ma de bi," which was a rather strong imprecation. Best said to someone in China if you had a gun already in your hand. I understand, Shen replied, knowing that he'd never say anything like that except to a particularly humble underling in his own office. Zhang left. He had to talk with this over his friend, Fang Gan. What's interesting in this book is that it theorizes a government not too dissimilar to that which actually Trump did seem to be trying to put in place, i.e. bringing in deal makers from the world of business and high finance to run the areas which they are traditionally administered by. Final book, and we're well over 15 minutes. Tom Clancy's Red Storm Rising. Muslim terrorists who destroyed the Soviet Union's largest petrochemical plant thought they were striking a blow for freedom. What they had done, unknowingly, was fire the first shots in World War III. Desperately short of oil, the Kremlin hawks see only one way of solving their problem: seize supplies in the Persian Gulf. To do that, they must first neutralize NATO's forces and eliminate their response. So they developed Red Storm, a dazzling master plan of diplomatic subterfuge and intense rearmament. The battle lines are drawn and Armageddon beckons. It includes an invasion and occupation of Iceland. All sorts of things happen in it. And Red Storm Rising is one of those books which, to an extent, are co-authored. Tom Clancy does lean heavily on advisors, and this book is perhaps particularly interesting because I call it the book that's launched a billion simulations, a billion war games, because I swear the amount of times I walk in and there are classes which are divided up, hundreds of students divided up into little groups of 5 or 6 playing war games based on Red Storm Rising, and have been going on for decades since it was first released. It's a fairly good, fairly startling starting point. It's got several points you can jump off from as a premise to war game from. It's interesting. One of the interesting things is when I talk to people from both sides, they both critique it as saying the other side is more capable than they actually were. When I talk to some of they were erstwhile Soviet officers who now used to come and occasionally teach at various places I taught at. They would say, "Oh yes, they suggest our bombers were weaker than they were and our fighters are shorter range than they were, and yes, they overestimate their technological advantage completely." And when you talk to the Americans, they go, "Well, we'd never be so arrogant as to believe this or as to be conned by that trick, and we would never be so, we would see this coming." And you sit there and listen to both of them and go, the odds are then that Mr. Clancy and whoever he was talking to got it roughly right. If you both think that you are both equally complaining that you are being misrepresented and you are stronger than that, or the other side is weaker than that, then probably he's got it about right. So that was Tom Clancy. That was 20 minutes. And I hope you enjoyed the first 4 books, 4 random books, fiction. Take care. Thank you as always to my subscribers, to my watchers, to the people who pressed the little bell down below, and to my patrons who allow me to keep my book habit.